huge.
That's amazing.
Oh my gosh, yo!
Oh, wow.
You're not done yet.
Hi, my name is Josh, lead pastor of Center Point Church, and I want to thank you for joining us online today. We are in week 3 of our annual giving campaign called Be Rich, and we couldn't be more excited for all that our church is impacting the community with, and also just the idea that we can make a difference in the community around us. And you might be wondering, well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing an annual giving campaign at a church? Well, we believe that the reason we're doing this is because people matter to God, whether God matters to them or not. And so we want to make a difference. We want to make our community better. So that's why we're giving and we're serving and we're loving well this month. And this whole idea of be rich, it actually comes from a 1st century letter that's written by a man named Paul to a young pastor. And we find this in the Bible. And he writes this to a young pastor. It's in the book of Timothy. And he writes these words. He says, to be rich, command people or direct people to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. And so that's what this month is all about, being rich in good deeds, being generous and willing to share the love that we have. This is why in week 1, we did our call to action, which is to give financially to bless 3 incredible local organizations around us. That's why last week we talked about serving and serving our community well and how we can get directly involved with different organizations. And this week we're talking about love, how we can love our community and make a difference to the world and the neighbors around us. Now, I don't know what kind of religious framework you grew up in. Maybe you didn't grow up in one. For myself, I grew up in church. But I grew up in this old way or this old arrangement or this old way of doing things and an old way of relating with God. And the assumption that I had growing up was this, that I could confess or I could behave my way into a barrier-free relationship with God. And this is religion, that I can earn my way or I can prove myself enough and then God will love me or God will accept me or all things will be good. And Catholicism or Protestantism or even the Muslim faith has versions of this. And so I grew up in the church and I grew up asking myself questions like this. Is there anything wrong with blank? Or is this a sin? Or I even did how close to the sin line can I get before I've gone too far? And this all stemmed because I believed that my relationship with God was based on how well I could obey, how well I could perform. And you got to ask yourself the question, as I eventually had to ask myself the question, well, where did this all come from? Where did this idea come from? It all stems from this old arrangement, which is arrangement that God made between his people at the time, the Israelites, and himself. And the Jewish scriptures outline God's arrangement with Israel. There was an old covenant or an Old Testament. We use the term Old Testament, which is a Latin word for covenant. And it was this cause and effect type of relationship that if you obey, I'll bless you. And if you disobey, I'll unbless you. If you disobey for long enough, we even see this in portions of the Old Testament in some of those stories, that it will leave you to captivity. And we see this kind of cause and effect relationship that if I do good enough, I'm going to get good. And if I'm bad, if I don't perform well, then God's going to be displeased with me. But the good news is that there's hints in the Jewish scriptures that something better is coming. A different arrangement is ahead. Something like a new covenant, which is a new arrangement. And so Jesus inaugurates, or he announces the inauguration of a new covenant between God and the individuals from every single nation, not just Israel. And it was fueled by a new governing ethic that shifted the focus from a certain code of works to that of grace. And out of that grace or that love that we find, the forgiveness that we find from God, that then it impacts the way in which we treat people around us in the world. And this relationship with God that is based on grace, something we don't deserve, that God gives us through Jesus, that relationship with God is measured against our relationship with others. And rather than trying to uphold a seemingly endless list of laws, it would be reduced to a single command. That our relationship with God and our relationship with those around us would be predicated on love. Not on performance, but on what God had done for us. And then in turn, in experiencing God's love, then giving that to the world around us. John, one of the early disciples of Jesus, a follower of Jesus, writes about this in one of his books. It's interesting, the first book that we find is a collection of Jesus' life, and it's called the Gospel of John. And he calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. He also writes 3 letters to other churches. And it's one of these 3 letters, the first one he writes, that we're going to be looking at today. And John, who was with Jesus, he announces this new way. He explains this new way, this way of grace, this way of love, and the way that once we are impacted by God, then in turn, we make a difference to those around us. And he's going to talk about this today, this new covenant, this new arrangement, this new way. And so this is how he writes it. He says this, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin." And that sin means missing the mark. But if anybody does sin, this is good news. This is the good news. We have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. And I know many people, when they hear the word sin, their reaction is to go, I don't want to hear anything about this. But the good news is, whether you've messed up intentionally or unintentionally, more than a mistake, that you've caused harm or you've done things in your life that you're not proud of, that you wish you could do again, the good news is that even when we do that, that Jesus forgives us. That's what John is saying here. It's a new way. It's a new covenant. It's not based on your works, but it's based on the work of Jesus. So John outlines that. And he says he is the atoning. It means that he paid for that sin as a sacrifice for our sins. He atoned it. He paid for it. And not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. Jesus, in one foul swoop, paid for it all. And we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. What's interesting is many people stop at this verse. They stop at, he's paid for our sins and he paid for the sins of the world, period. But John here extends it and he says, we know that we have come to know Jesus. We've come to know his forgiveness, and those that followed Jesus know that we've been changed. And we know this if we keep his commands. We typically glide over this, but John wants this to become the focus of his letter. And he wants those that call themselves Jesus followers to not just say, God, you and me are good, but to extend that to something even further. And so he writes this in the next verse. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. Those are pretty sharp words that Jesus says. But look what John says. Look what John says next, though. But if anyone obeys his word, commands him, does his commands, loves for God, is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we are in him. In other words, we know that we're followers of Jesus, not just because we understand it, because there's an outworking of that in our lives. And he talks about this, anyone that obeys the word. So we must ask the question, well then, what does Jesus command? And these are great words. And so John is going to unpack this for us in the next few verses. He said, whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. The commands that Jesus gave us, and to follow after him. It's not just enough that we know him, but that our lives reflect Jesus. And dear friends, I am not writing you a new command, but an old one. And this is when the church was first formed. So it's not talking about the Old Testament that I already referenced. It's talking about when the church first started, that this letter was written later. But when Jesus first walked the earth and he began to teach people and train people, this is what John is referring to. And then he says this next, which you had since the beginning of the church. That's what he's talking about. This old command is the message you have heard. Yes, I am writing you a new command. So he's going to tell us there's something new that he's going to bring to the table. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. And this is what he means. He says that if these things are at work in your life, if Jesus is at work in your life, they will be visible to everyone around you. That if Jesus is working in you, his love will be seen in you by how you treat others. And this is how he continues. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or a sister is still in the darkness. In other words, we can't continue to pursue this relationship with Jesus with hate and with malice and with mistreatment towards other people. It means the darkness isn't still in us, that Jesus still needs to do work in us. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light. And there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. And here's the thing, is he's talking about mistreatment. He's saying you can't just hate. And many of us would say, well, Josh, I don't hate somebody. I mean, I just deeply dislike them. Or you know what? I just dismiss them constantly, or I consider them unimportant. And so it's not really like I hate them. I'm just kind of mistreating them. And what John is saying here is part of following Jesus. It's not just enough to look up and say, God, me and you are good. It's that there needs to be intentionality and there needs to be an outworking in our life of how we treat other people around us. And this is the type of love that John here in the letter and Jesus ultimately wants us to live by. Because mistreatment of other people creates conflict with God and problems in our life. And it's not just enough to say, God, you forgive me and we're good, but that John here, as Jesus too, gives us marching orders to extend this to others. And if we're not careful, we can easily dehumanize people. We can mistreat them, or we can use them for our own benefit. And this isn't an option. What Jesus calls all people that follow him. And maybe you're like, well, I don't follow Jesus, and I'm just trying to figure this whole thing out. And I just clicked to church online, and I totally get that. But for those that call themselves a follower of Jesus, how we treat other people is reflective of how we believe Jesus has treated us. And if we're scouring the pages of the Bible to find justification for our behavior, we're clinging to what I talked about earlier, the old way, the old arrangement, the old covenant. And this is what the Pharisees did, and this is one of the things Jesus couldn't stand. He said, if you love God, then the love of God must be seen in you. And this is a great opportunity for us culturally. Because when we talk about our behavior, the good and the bad, we have to understand that it has impact on other people. And we have such a great opportunity now to attach that love that we've received from God as Jesus followers, to attach that behavior to our actions, to inform a world around us of what we truly believe to be most important and the way in which we believe life should be lived. Not some sort of code that do good, get good. A different code, the one of grace, that we even give to others what they don't deserve because God gave us what we didn't deserve. We had sinned, we fell short, but God still gave his love and his grace to us. And so too, we have an opportunity to extend that to the world around us. And this isn't like, I'm going to love you because you've behaved well, and I'm going to do good to you if you've done good to me. No, this is a radical new kind of way, a radical new kind of love and how we interact with the world around us. And this kind of love is less complicated than fulfilling all of the laws, but it is a much more demanding way forward. Because there's no loopholes or shortcuts or escape clauses to loving someone well. And it boils down to our least favorite question. One we almost know the answer to, almost always know the answer to, but we just don't really want to go there because it demands something more of us. And maybe you've heard this question before. If you've been around Centerpoint, I'm sure you have, but it's this question. What does love require of me? What does love require of me? When I see the world around me or I see that tweet that comes in, what does love require of me? When I have an opportunity to extend my hand or a word of encouragement, what does love require of me? When I'm struggling in that conversation with my spouse and I don't quite know how to get past it, or I'm having that conversation, that tension with my kid again, what does love require of me? When I feel like I'm not getting ahead and other people are getting the promotions, when I feel like other people are getting all the good and I'm not, what does love require of me? When I see a world around me that holds a different value system, or somebody that votes differently politically, or somebody that's on the other side of the vaccine aisle, or somebody on the other side of the mask mandate, what does love require of me? When I see somebody that's hurting and I have an opportunity to respond, what does love require of me? And for those that call themselves Jesus followers, there's a new way forward, a different way forward. And it's not the old way based on behavior, it's a new way of grace. And to be frank, I wish I'd come to this conclusion earlier. I was a Pharisee. Me. I was the one that thought, you know what? Give people what they deserve. Because my relationship with God earlier on was all about what I could earn. And when I did something wrong, I was like, you know what? I deserve bad. I deserve wrong. But that's not God's love for us. That's an old way. And often I was focused more, even in how I interact with other people, more on them believing right than me loving well. When they finally get it, then of course I'm going to love them. When they finally get it, of course I'm going to be open-handed. Or when they finally get it, then I'll be encouraging. But what about now? What does love require of me now is the new way forward that John talks about and ultimately Jesus calls those that follow him to. Because I'm not always sure in messy situations exactly how it should unfold, but I always know what love requires of me if I ask the question. It's less complicating, but it's more demanding. But it has the potential to change communities and to change everything. And for Jesus followers, this is the question that we must ask ourselves. As we think about this Be Rich annual giving campaign, what does love require of me today? Might be of somebody that comes to mind right now that you need to extend forgiveness to or call. It might be somebody right now that you feel like you had the opportunity to help or to encourage and you didn't, but you know the opportunity is still available and you need to seize it. And you might say, well, you know what, Be Rich is nice once a year and it kind of feels like we'll focus on it now and then it go away. And it's easy to feel like, you know what, love, the week of love is kind of an add-on. Or maybe I already gave, and maybe I already served, or I am serving, or I already gave, or I thought about giving, but I served. Or maybe you did one of them and you said, oh, that's enough, and love kind of seems like an add-on. I don't really need to extend the forgiveness because I did something else. Again, that's an old way. And today it's not about an add-on. Today is about an actionable. What does love require of me today? To do something thoughtful, intentional for someone else who will be surprised you thought about her, or you thought about him. You thought about them. And so right now in the service, we're going to do something we've never done before, but we're going to make this actionable right now. So I want you to do is I want you to pick up your phone. I'm going to pick up my phone as well. And you're like, phone in service? Wow, this is progressive. Come on. But we're going to pick up our phones right now. And I'm going to put a minute countdown on the screen. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to pick up your phone and think about somebody right now that you could text and you can encourage. Maybe it's somebody you need to even text and say, we need to have a conversation because I just want to talk some things out. Maybe it's somebody you need to ask for forgiveness from, or somebody that's been weighing on your heart that you haven't called back, that you know that there's some animosity or tension that you just need to pick up the phone and call and make it right. Or at least do what you can. Or maybe you're on the other side. Maybe it's not that, but maybe it's just sending an encouraging message. But right now, to pick up your phone, I'm going to do it. And we're going to put a minute timer on the screen. And we're just going to send a message to somebody that is going to make their day, make things right, but make things better. And so I'm going to put it on the screen right now. I want to encourage you to pick up your phone right now. I got mine in my hand, and I'm going to send a message. So I'm going to toss this on the screen right now. You're going to see it come up, and we're going to give you 1 minute to send that encouraging message right now as an actionable, and then I'm going to come back and pray. So here we go. We're going to put up the timer right now. Why don't you send that message? Here we go. Just pulling somebody up right now. Somebody I actually know has been going through a really tough time. That's who I'm sending the message to. 20 seconds left. Ten seconds left. 6, 5. There we go. And we spent a minute sending a message to somebody, making a practical difference in their life. And this is what love looks like. Asking yourself the question, what does love require of me today? And if you didn't get a chance to do it right there, you can get a chance to practically do that after the service, or even as Carla comes up in just a minute to do the post, that she's going to encourage you to take that step. And we know that we can make even a simple difference through sending a text message or an encouraging message to somebody, and to encouraging them, or to bridging the gap, or to making things better in somebody in our life. I'm going to pray right now and then pitch to Carla, but thanks for joining us today. Let's pray. God, we'd ask that as we send these messages out, or we ask the question, what does love require of me today? That God, you bring somebody to mind, somebody we can encourage, somebody that we can make a difference in, somebody that we can influence, somebody where we can pray for them, or lean in to that relationship, or extend forgiveness, even just extend grace towards them by saying, hey, I would love to talk. Whatever that looks like today, God, that you would encourage us, not just to keep, for those of us that are followers of Jesus, our faith to ourselves, but that we put that into action, and that we'd share that love with those around us in the community. God, I thank you so much that you've positioned us where we are to make a difference and to have influence. God, we'd ask that you'd use it. God, that your kingdom would come through us. And God, we thank you for the opportunities ahead to love well. Use what we get to do together as a church. God, use it to create influence and opportunity, and ultimately use it to build your kingdom. Amen. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you are encouraged. Carla's going to be back up right now with the post. I'll see you next week as we conclude our Be Rich series and we reveal some of the totals from this month. I'll see you there.